Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into one of the biggest and maybe most important financial stories happening right now, China's gigantic and very secret global lending spree.
Okay, so get ready for this number, $800 billion. Over the last couple of decades, that's how much China has loaned out to developing countries around the world. It's a figure that's honestly hard to even wrap your head around.
But here's the catch, right? Unlike the World Bank or other big lenders who are pretty open about their books, most of China's lending happens in the shadows. And that secrecy, well, it's created this enormous hidden debt problem that is seriously threatening to boil over. Okay, let's get into it.
All right, first things first, we really need to grasp the sheer scale of this operation. We're not just talking about China becoming another big lender on the block. No, we're talking about a historic, fundamental shift in the entire landscape of global finance. I mean, just look at this. At its absolute peak, China's lending wasn't just big, it was larger than the World Bank, the IMF, and all 22 of the major creditor nations in the Paris Club combined. Yeah, you heard that right. In a remarkably short period, China went from being a borrower itself to the world's single largest creditor for developing nations. It's wild. And because of all that secrecy, for years, literally no one knew the real numbers. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars completely off the official books. It was like a giant financial black box, and the details only ever seemed to leak out when a country was already deep in crisis.
So you might be thinking, a loan is a loan, right? What's the big deal? Well, not exactly. What makes these loans so profoundly different, it's all buried deep in the fine print.
So it turns out, these loans have three really unusual and kinda unique conditions that you just don't see in any standard international agreement. On the surface, sure, they might look like a regular commercial deal, but when you dig into the terms and conditions, it is a whole different ballgame.
Okay, first up, collateral. And this is a big one. About half of these loans require the borrowing country to basically pipe their foreign income from things like oil or mineral sales directly into an offshore bank account that the Chinese lender controls. And if they default, that money can be seized instantly. I mean, this is something institutions like the World Bank would just never, ever do.
Second, there's this thing called a No Paris Club clause. So the Paris Club, that's traditionally where all the big creditor nations get in a room together to hash out a deal when a country is in financial trouble. But China's contracts basically say, nope, not for us. They demand their own separate private negotiation outside of that group process.
And this brings us to the final and maybe most shocking piece of the puzzle, extreme confidentiality. Look, lenders often keep deals private. That's normal. But these contracts legally forbid the borrower, the country itself, from telling anyone, including their own citizens, the terms of their debt. It's a gag order on a national scale. So with terms this tough, you have to ask, why? Why would China lend out so much money in the first place? Well, this wasn't random. It was all part of a very clear and very deliberate economic and strategic plan.
You see, there was this perfect storm between roughly 2003 and 2015. China's economy was just exploding, growing at like 10% a year. They were piling up these massive foreign currency reserves and were desperately looking for places to invest all that cash.
And this is really the most important thing to get. These weren't just financial transactions. They were strategic moves designed to fuel China's own engine. They were locking down access to raw materials, creating guaranteed customers for Chinese construction companies, and, of course, expanding their global influence through huge projects like the Belt and Road Initiative.
But then, right around 2015, the music started to fade. The global conditions that made this whole lending boom possible, they started to change, and change dramatically. The party, you could say, was just about over.
For starters, China's own economy, that unstoppable engine, started to slow way down. That era of crazy double-digit growth was gone, and suddenly they had their own serious problems to deal with at home, from a shaky real estate market to a population that was aging fast.
And at the exact same time, global commodity prices just fell off a cliff. Now, why does that matter? Well, for all those borrowing countries, their ability to pay back these loans was tied to selling stuff like oil and copper. When the prices crashed, their income dried up, and that debt, which seemed manageable a few years earlier, suddenly became a crushing, unbearable weight. So now the whole flow of money has done a complete 180. Since 2019, developing countries are actually paying China about $10 billion more each year in debt payments than they're getting in new loans. It's like the ATM is officially closed, and now the bill has come due.
This massive reversal has pushed dozens of countries right to the edge, creating the perfect conditions for a widespread but very, very quiet debt crisis.
And for a lot of these nations, the debt burden is just staggering. I mean, look at places like Djibouti, Laos, or Zambia. They owe China an amount that's equal to nearly a third of their entire economic output for a whole year. It's just unsustainable.
So, how is China dealing with all of this? Well, for the most part, they're just kicking the can down the road. They're offering temporary relief, like extending the repayment schedule, but they almost never actually reduce the total amount of money that's owed. It's a classic delay and pretend strategy. And what this does is it traps borrowers in a vicious cycle, what some people call a debt trap. They're stuck constantly repaying and restructuring, which means they can't invest in their own people, in their own future. If a country fundamentally can't pay, just delaying the deadline doesn't magically solve the problem. It just prolongs the pain.
And don't expect a big global solution anytime soon. Why? Because the major world powers, China, the US, Europe, they just don't trust each other. Everyone is afraid that if they forgive some debt, that freed up money will just be used to pay back one of their geopolitical rivals. So nobody moves.
And all of this leaves us with a really big, really critical question that's going to shape international finance for years to come. With the world's most powerful players in a standoff, unable to act together, who will ultimately pay the price for this hidden debt crisis? Because when the music stops, it's often the citizens of the most vulnerable nations who are left without a chair.